Turn around. Hands behind your back. Kendra blinked in disbelief, still in uniform, ID in hand, boots polished, but Officer Malloy wasn't listening. As the cold steel of the handcuffs locked around her wrists, one thought burned in her mind: you saw all the proof and still chose to see a threat. There wasn't anything unusual about the Marathon gas station on the outskirts of Hilliard, Ohio. A couple of aging fuel pumps. A broken air machine. A flickering open sign in the front window. Just another quiet stop along the route to Whitehall, one that Staff Sergeant Kendra Mason had used before without a second thought. It was early, 7:35 a.m., and the morning air still held onto a layer of stubborn Midwestern chill. She could see her breath when she stepped out of her dark blue 2015 Ford Escape. Her uniform was crisp, boots laced, name patch aligned with quiet pride. 11 years in the Army Reserve taught her that discipline wasn't a mood, it was muscle memory. She didn't love drill weekends, didn't dread them either. They were just part of the rhythm. Routine. Predictable. But this morning would be anything but. Kendra slid her debit card into the reader, selected regular unleaded, and exhaled as she opened a protein bar. Her phone buzzed in her breast pocket, her aunt, checking in like always before a drill. She typed a quick all good and smiled. She didn't notice the white Chevy Tahoe that pulled into the lot 2 pumps down. Didn't see the 2 men inside. Not at first. Officer Trent Malloy, 31, buzz cut, bulletproof ego. He leaned forward, elbow on the center console, pointing at Kendra. That her, he muttered. Officer Ronald Blake, 54, leaned back in the driver's seat with a sigh. Does it matter? He asked without interest. But Malloy was already stepping out. Kendra was capping her tank when she heard it. Ma'am. Step away from the vehicle. She turned, confused. Is something wrong, officer? Her voice was calm but alert. Now, Malloy snapped, tone loaded with suspicion, not authority. That tone made her spine stiffen. She stepped back slowly, palms visible. Blake stayed near their cruiser, silent behind his mirrored sunglasses. Malloy approached, hand resting near his belt. You got ID on you? Of course, Kendra replied, keeping her voice even. I'm on my way to drill. Army Reserve. She reached slowly into her chest pocket and pulled out both her military ID and driver's license. She extended them, one in each hand. Malloy glanced, barely reading. This uniform isn't for Halloween, she added. Who said it was? He shot back. We got a report. Suspicious person loitering. Just doing our job. Kendra's eyes shifted to Officer Blake, hoping for a rational anchor. Nothing. Just passive observation. You sure this ID's legit? Malloy asked. Her chest tightened. Are you accusing me of impersonating military? Turn around, Malloy ordered suddenly. Excuse me, she blinked. Ma'am, I'm giving you a lawful command. Hands behind your back. You're detaining me? She asked, stunned. Malloy didn't answer. Blake gave a nod, not out of agreement, just procedure. Kendra clenched her fists, turned around. This is a mistake, she said. And it's going to cost you. The cuffs clicked tight around her wrists, too tight. She winced but gave no satisfaction. Across the lot, a voice shouted, Yo! What's she even doing wrong? That's a soldier, man. Malloy barked back, mind your business. But it was too late. Phones were already out. Kendra sat upright in the back of the cruiser, breathing steady, shoulders squared. The back seat smelled like sun-baked vinyl and regret. She stared out the window, watching Malloy strut around her car like he'd just cracked a major case. Blake stood nearby, arms crossed, disinterested. Kendra leaned forward, speaking clearly through the barrier. I want to call my commanding officer. You'll get a phone call at the station, Malloy replied. That's not how this works, she said. You're detaining a service member in uniform. I have a right to notify base command. That made Malloy turn. You're being held under suspicion of impersonating military personnel. That's a federal offense. Sit tight. Kendra's voice didn't waver. This is racial profiling. And you know it. Nobody said anything about race, lady. We got a call. We responded. You ignored valid ID, she said. You ignored license plates. My name tag. And now I'm in cuffs because you think this uniform doesn't belong to me? Malloy didn't reply. But Blake looked up in the mirror. You should have just stayed quiet. Kendra met his eyes without blinking. You should have done your job right. He muttered something, then dropped her phone into her lap without unlocking the cuffs. She twisted to maneuver it, tapping with the edge of her thumb. One swipe. One number. It rang twice. Colonel Vance, came the voice, alert and clipped. Sir, she said, steady. I'm cuffed in the back of a police cruiser in Hilliard. Officers claim I'm impersonating military. They've seen my ID. They don't care. There was a pause. Names? No badges shown. White Chevy Tahoe. Sinclair Station off Hayden Run. I'm en route. Keep the line open. Kendra didn't hang up. Didn't need to. Malloy walked past the cruiser, visibly agitated. We're getting heat, he muttered to Blake. Someone's already live on Facebook. You hear me? Colonel Vance said again. I hear you, Kendra replied. Crowds building. Malloy leaned into the window. Who's Vance? Your lawyer? Try Colonel Eric Vance. 412th Logistics Battalion. His face twitched. He stepped back. A woman in scrubs near the sidewalk shouted, She's in uniform, idiots. I got it on video. Malloy turned to Blake. We might have screwed this one. Blake shrugged. Too late now. You still think I wear this uniform for show? Kendra asked him flatly. The silence was weighty. Another cruiser pulled in. A black lieutenant stepped out, no expression, no wasted movement. He went straight to the back window. Tapped. Staff Sergeant Mason? Yes, sir. I've been informed by Colonel Vance. I've reviewed the footage. We're correcting this now. He opened the door himself, gently uncuffed her. On behalf of this department, I apologize. She stood, flexing her wrists. Her eyes locked on Malloy and Blake. You're not sorry, she said. You're just caught. But that moment wasn't the end. It was only the spark. The match lit against dry paper. And somewhere, miles away, Colonel Eric Vance was already on the phone with someone else, someone higher. Because this wasn't going to get buried. Not this time. Kendra stood in the cold morning air, wrists still sore from the cuffs, uniform slightly wrinkled but dignity fully intact. The lieutenant who had released her gave a brief nod of acknowledgement before turning to speak with the officers who had just made the biggest mistake of their careers. Behind them, the crowd was still gathering, cameras still rolling, voices rising. But Kendra's phone line was still open, Colonel Eric Vance hadn't hung up, and he didn't need her to speak to know what came next. I saw the live stream, his voice said plainly in her ear. And I've already made a few calls. Stay put. Let them unravel themselves. Kendra exhaled slowly and leaned against her SUV, watching Officer Malloy pace near the cruiser, his earlier bravado visibly slipping into nerves. Blake stood further back, arms crossed, jaw clenched. He hadn't said much, but he didn't need to, his silence had spoken volumes. The crowd now spanned the edge of the lot, spilling onto the sidewalk. A teenager with a TikTok handle printed on his hoodie was narrating the whole thing on live video. She had ID. They cuffed her anyway. In uniform. Like, how do you mess that up this bad? A woman in scrubs, same one who'd spoken up earlier, stood nearby with her arms folded, shaking her head in disbelief. They didn't even check. They just assumed. And she still kept her cool. That's a soldier, all right. Inside the cruiser, the radio crackled. Malloy grabbed it, voice tight. Dispatch, we have a developing situation at the marathon on Hayden Run. Civilian interference. Requesting backup. Backup, someone from the crowd shouted. For what? A woman with a protein bar and a uniform? The energy shifted further, tension growing dense in the air like a thunderstorm about to break. Kendra didn't flinch. She knew what was happening. They were scrambling. She had seen it before, in training exercises, during deployments, and briefings. When systems collapse, people grab for control. But this wasn't war. This was home. And they were the ones who'd lost control. Colonel, she said quietly into her mic, they just called for backup. Let them, Vance replied. It'll make the review even easier. Across town, Colonel Vance was already in motion. He was sitting in a small conference room at the city's Joint Reserve Base, coffee untouched, eyes locked on a large monitor where a paused frame from the live stream showed Kendra's arms pinned behind her. Send me the body cam pulls now, he told a sergeant from the military liaison unit. Timestamp everything. Civilian footage too. I want every angle. We're not waiting for them to redact this. A call beeped in. It was the city manager. Eric, we're aware of an incident involving one of your people. We're getting inquiries from Channel 6 and Columbus Weekly already. Then you better act fast, Vance said. Because that incident is becoming a headline. Meanwhile, a black police lieutenant named Howard Givens stood in the lot, reviewing raw footage from a colleague's tablet. He watched Kendra hand over her ID, heard her explain she was on her way to drill, saw her comply, calm and clear, and then watched as Malloy cuffed her without verifying anything. How many seconds did he even glance at her ID? Givens asked the officer beside him. Maybe 2? The other officer didn't answer. Givens looked over at Malloy, who was sweating now, even in the morning chill. Givens walked back to Kendra. Ma'am, he said, keeping his tone formal, we've begun the official review. The situation is being escalated to the oversight board. Do you need medical attention? No, sir, Kendra said evenly. Just my respect back. You'll get more than that, he replied. Then he turned and walked straight to Malloy. Get ready to write a statement. Sir, I was just responding to a call, Malloy began, his voice defensive. You had identification in hand, Givens said flatly. You were looking at her name tag and still put her in cuffs. You think that's protocol? It looked suspicious. No, Givens cut him off. You didn't think she belonged in that uniform. Say what you mean. Malloy shut his mouth. Givens turned away and radioed dispatch. This is Lieutenant Givens. I want all unit footage uploaded immediately to the review cloud. Tag the officer IDs, time of arrival, and location metadata. I'm also requesting full dispatch transcripts. At that moment, a local journalist named Amanda Rourke stepped out of her Civic across the street, mic in hand, camera on her shoulder. We're live at a Marathon gas station in Hilliard where a uniformed Army reservist was detained this morning under suspicion of impersonating military personnel. Eyewitnesses say she presented valid ID and was still cuffed. Social media footage shows what some are calling a clear case of racial profiling. Back at the station, Colonel Vance sent out a press advisory to the Department of Military Affairs. The subject line read, Officer misconduct involving verified Army reservist, urgent. The body contained attachments, footage, stills, timestamps, witness accounts. He copied the mayor, the State Guard's legal team, and the Pentagon's media rep. Within 30 minutes, 3 major newsrooms had received anonymous tips. Kendra stayed silent through it all. She didn't need to shout. She didn't need to argue. Her strength was in her restraint, and the weight of the truth did the rest. At 9:03 a.m., bodycam footage leaked online. It showed Malloy mocking her uniform after cuffing her, saying, bet she's one of those weekend warriors. They fake it half the time. Blake replied with a dry chuckle, real or not, she had an attitude. Let her stew in the car. The clip lasted 11 seconds. But it detonated like a bomb. Thousands of views. Then tens of thousands. By lunchtime, it was trending in Ohio and beyond. Hashtags emerged, hashtag respect the uniform, hashtag Kendra Mason, hashtag cuffed for serving. Teachers played it in classrooms. Veterans groups issued statements. Students walked out of a nearby high school holding signs that read, "She followed every rule, they broke every one." The mayor held a late morning briefing. This city does not tolerate misconduct or racial bias. An internal review is underway. We are coordinating with military leadership. It wasn't enough. Not yet. Kendra declined interviews. She ignored the reporters gathered outside the reserve base, camped near her apartment. But she responded to every message from a fellow reservist. She answered each text from a younger recruit asking, "What do I do if this happens to me?" "You stay calm," she wrote. "You keep your dignity. And you call someone who will fight for you." Her silence became its own statement. A wall of strength that exposed the weakness on the other side. At 4:15 p.m., the department released a statement. The officers involved have been placed on administrative leave pending investigation. It was formal. Cold. Lacking apology. But it was a start. That evening, as the sun dipped behind a row of trees near the station, someone left flowers on the hood of Kendra's SUV. A sticky note tucked beneath the bouquet read, "You carried yourself like a soldier. Thank you for showing the rest of us how." Kendra didn't seek attention. She didn't want it. But the truth had its own gravity. And now, no one was looking away. By the time the sun rose the next morning, the flowers left on the hood of Kendra Mason's SUV had begun to wilt, but the story behind them was only growing stronger. The footage of her handcuffed in uniform, calm and composed while two officers ignored her credentials, had gone national overnight. The 11-second bodycam clip that caught the officers mocking her had been shared by veterans groups, civil rights advocates, and even a retired Navy admiral who tweeted, "I've served 32 years. This is what quiet dignity under fire looks like." Shame on those officers. At the Hilliard Police Department, things moved fast, but not fast enough to keep up with the public. By 8 a.m., a full administrative review had been launched. By 9:30, both Officer Malloy and Officer Blake had been placed on unpaid suspension. By 11 a.m., the department's PR rep had drafted 3 separate statements. But none of it could contain what had already escaped. Colonel Eric Vance sat in his office reviewing a letter he had just received from the Office of Military Affairs. It read in part, "Your swift action and continued professionalism helped de-escalate a potential flashpoint. Staff Sergeant Mason's conduct under pressure represents the highest standard of service." Vance didn't smile. He just picked up his phone and texted Kendra. The system blinked. "You didn't. Proud of you." Kendra didn't respond immediately. She was back in her apartment, sitting cross-legged on her floor, still in the same boots from the day before. Her phone buzzed with calls she didn't answer. Emails she didn't open. News outlets she didn't trust to get the story right. She hadn't spoken to a single reporter, and she didn't intend to. This wasn't about headlines. This wasn't about going viral. This was about making sure it didn't happen to someone else. By Thursday morning, the city council had received more than 400 emails demanding accountability. 2 local high schools held teach-ins on implicit bias. In a third-grade classroom on the east side, a student raised her hand after watching the video and asked her teacher, "If a soldier can't be safe, who can?" That question was now rippling through the community. The Hilliard police chief, under mounting pressure, called an internal meeting. The conclusion was swift and unanimous. Both officers had violated standard identification verification protocols. Worse, they had mishandled a situation involving military personnel, something clearly outlined in their departmental training manual. That afternoon, Malloy was brought into a quiet office and handed a termination letter. He tried to defend his actions, citing a vague sense of threat. The internal board member responded flatly. She was unarmed, in uniform, with valid ID. You had every opportunity to do this right. You chose not to. Blake didn't argue. He signed his termination form without speaking. When the news broke later that day, responses poured in. Some applauded the firings. Others said it was long overdue. A small segment tried to defend the officers, claiming they were just doing their jobs. But the majority saw it clearly. It wasn't just a mistake, it was a refusal to see her for who she was. Outside the local reserve base that evening, a group of veterans, black, white, Latino, lit candles and stood in silence. No speeches. No chants. Just quiet presence. One of them, a Marine in a faded desert camo jacket, held a sign that read, "We know what she stood for." Do you? Kendra didn't attend. She didn't need to. Her silence had already said more than 100 microphones ever could. She spent that weekend doing what she always did, attending drill. She didn't want special treatment. Didn't want the sideways glances or careful conversations. She showed up. On time. In uniform. With her duffel bag packed like always. But things had changed. Her commanding officer pulled her aside and said simply, "You did good, Mason. You did real good." She nodded. "I didn't do anything special." "Exactly," he replied. And that's what made it powerful. Meanwhile, the city's police oversight board issued a new policy. All officers must undergo updated training on how to properly verify military identification. Mandatory retraining on racial bias was launched. A liaison was appointed to serve as a direct line between the police department and the nearest military base. Small steps, but real. At home, Kendra was getting letters. Dozens. Then hundreds. Most she didn't reply to. But one stopped her cold. It was handwritten, addressed simply to Sergeant Kendra Mason, Army Reserve. Inside was a short note from a 20-year-old woman named Jasmine Harper. "I just enlisted. I've always worried about how people would look at me in uniform. Worried they'd think I didn't belong. But I saw you, calm, proud, strong, and I knew I could do it too. Thank you for not backing down." Kendra read that letter twice. Then a third time. Then she tucked it into the inside flap of her duffel bag. She didn't want to forget it. Not ever. Back in town, a rookie officer named Brandon Reeves sent a message through the new liaison. It read, "I wasn't on shift that day, but I've watched the video 10 times. I'm sorry for how they treated you. I'm going to do better." Kendra forwarded the message to Colonel Vance, who replied with one word, "Progress." And it was. Not enough. Not everything. But a start. At her local grocery store, people looked at her differently. Some with admiration. Others with a guarded kind of caution. One woman whispered to her husband in the cereal aisle, "That's her. That's the soldier from the news." Kendra didn't flinch. Didn't stop. Just kept walking. On a quiet Saturday morning, she ran into Patrice, the woman in scrubs who had spoken up at the gas station. Patrice introduced herself, smiling wide. "I just wanted you to know," she said, "you weren't alone that day. I saw it. And I got your back." Kendra smiled for the first time in days. "Thanks," she said. "That matters." The following week, Colonel Vance stopped by her apartment. They sat on her back porch eating barbecue and watching the sun slip behind the tree line. "You didn't panic," he said, biting into a rib. "You didn't yell. You let them expose themselves." "They'll do it again," Kendra said. "To someone else. Somewhere else." "Probably," Vance nodded. "But now people are watching. And now you've reminded them how to watch." Across town, new cameras had been installed at the Marathon station. At the department, officers were undergoing new simulations, each one starting with a line from the revised protocol: always verify. Always assess. Always see. And Kendra? She went back to her life. Drill weekends. Groceries. Morning jogs. Quiet strength. But when she received new letters from young soldiers, she wrote back. When a nearby community college asked her to speak to their criminal justice majors, she said yes. And when Jasmine Harper shipped out to basic training, Kendra mailed her a copy of the Army values. Highlighted in yellow was one word: integrity. Because surviving that moment didn't mean she wanted to live in it forever. It meant she knew how to carry it forward, so others wouldn't have to. Her name eventually left the headlines. The hashtags faded. But the lesson remained. You don't need to shout to stand your ground. But when you do, make sure someone's listening. In the story of Staff Sergeant Kendra Mason, we witnessed something painfully familiar yet powerfully instructive, a moment where dignity was tested not by war or crisis, but by bias, assumption, and abuse of authority here at home. Kendra followed every rule. She wore the uniform. She carried proper ID. She showed calm and respect. But for some, that still wasn't enough. They didn't see her service, they saw suspicion. And instead of asking questions, they made accusations. The lesson is clear: doing everything right doesn't always protect you from being wrongfully judged, but how you respond in those moments defines who you are, and more importantly, what others learn from you. Kendra didn't shout. She didn't fight back with fists or rage. She held the line with quiet strength. She called the right people. She trusted that the truth, when handled with discipline and dignity, could do the speaking for her. And in doing so, she didn't just defend herself, she exposed a deeper flaw in the system and sparked real change. This story is also a powerful reminder to those in positions of power: when you wear a badge, when you carry responsibility, you must lead with respect and clarity, not suspicion and pride. Authority is not a license to disregard someone's humanity. Especially not someone who swore an oath to serve this country, just like you did. For the rest of us, whether you wear a uniform or not, let Kendra's story remind you that sometimes courage doesn't roar. Sometimes, it looks like staying calm when you have every right to be angry. Sometimes, it looks like making the call, standing your ground, and letting the facts speak louder than your voice. At U.S. Instructive Stories, we want to thank you for listening to this story. For taking a moment to reflect, to learn, and to understand the deeper layers behind the headlines. Your attention is powerful. Your awareness is part of what makes change possible. If this story moved you, share it. Talk about it with your friends, your family, your coworkers. And remember, when we truly see one another, beyond the surface, beyond the stereotypes, that's when justice has a chance to grow. That's when respect becomes more than a word. It becomes a standard. Thank you for watching. And thank you for standing with stories that matter.